Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows Compiler. Today we will look again at using the Windows Forms Designer. This was our application at the end of the last video. We have created a very simple dialog with one label, one text box and one button on it. We're going to add more fields to this form, and we're going to start delving into what happens in the callback function, the event handler. This special function is triggered when the user interacts with the forms, when a user clicks on an object or enters text into an object. So let's go and have a look at our code. So we are firstly going to go into our Forms Designer and add more controls to this simple form. And there is our form. We will first of all reduce the size of this label, and we're going to create some more text boxes. The easy way to do this is to select the box, do a Ctrl+C, then a Ctrl+V. This will create a new text box for you. We can then use the down arrow on the keyboard to move it down on the screen. And we'll do the same again to create a third field. So we'll want a title for each of these, so we can do the same. We can create some more labels quite happily just by copying what we've got. Let's move this down a little further. Now, if we look at the first title and double click on it, we can see that it is a label. And we've given it a specific name, IDC_label title. We're going to do the same for these new fields. I'm going to create one called name. And we're going to create one called age. Now I'm going to reduce the size of the font on here in a moment, but we'll do that in the code. So we have a text box which we have named. I'm going to do exactly the same for the new fields. As you can see, I'm using a naming convention for the fields, preceding the name of our field with txt for text. This is my own particular naming convention. You don't have to use this particular one, but it's useful to have some kind of naming convention. That way, when you look in your code, rather than referring to text box 1, text box 2, these fields will be named for their purpose. In this case, title, name, and age. It makes your code much more readable and easier for you to maintain and support as time goes on. Although you may spend a great deal of time developing an application, you will probably spend even more time maintaining it, adding things to it and taking things away as requirements change. So now that we've got these fields here, let's go back to the code. So if we save this, and once that's saved, we can go back to our source code. So if we hit the F2 button and have a look at the show title, and we'll see in here we've added new text boxes. One for name, one for age, and associated labels. If we run the application now, we can see there are our three fields with their labels and their text boxes, and our exit button. So at the moment, we're setting the font in here. We're declaring a new font, specifying the details as we did in the last video, and we're setting each of these text boxes to be font size 1. I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to take this code out of here. So I'm not going to do the font inside the form. What we're going to do is something to give you a little more flexibility. We're going to create a global variable to hold our font handle. And having declared that, we're going to set it inside the PB main function. We're going to declare our new font in the PB main function just as we did before in the form. And I'm going to do something a little different here. We're going to use the dialog default command. It will set the default font used through the rest of the application. So we're going to default that to sans serif 10 point. If we attempt to run the application now, you'll see that something a little different has happened. The dialog itself has become larger. Plus, as you saw, it's not initially centered on our screen. So that's something we want to do. So let's go in and center it on screen. So if we go back to our Forms Designer and double click on the dialog and go into the styles, we'll see on the left hand side there's a DS Center option which was not ticked. We will tick that, hit OK, and we will save. And once we go back to our application and run it again, our dialog should be centered on the screen. And there we have a nice, large dialog centered on the screen. But as you can see, our fields are quite large, and the font hasn't been set for our titles yet. So we will go back and we'll set those. I'm going to go into the event handler, the callback function. And in the initialize handler, at the beginning of this function, we're going to put in the code to set the font for each of those three objects. I'm using the prefix command here to save a little bit of typing. The prefix command will take what we have in quotes, in this case control set font, and at compile time it will add that to the beginning of each of these next 4 lines. Our title, our name, our age. I'm going to create a new field, a label field called feedback output. This to be used to display the final version of what the user has keyed in. And before we run our application, we will close off this global font to free up any memory it was using before our application exits. So having done a few more adjustments to our form, it's looking a little tidier now. We have 3 fields, title, name and age. And we have our form feedback on the right hand side. I've also added a second button called Submit. The idea behind most forms is the user fills in the fields, and having filled the fields in, will then click some kind of Submit or Do button. This will allow the form to do some processing and perhaps save this information to another part of the application or perhaps even into a database. All we're going to do in this application is once the user has filled these fields in and clicked on Submit, we will validate these fields, and if the validation passes, we will fill in the details on the right hand side. If the validation fails, we want to highlight to the user which field or fields have actually had problems and allow the user to make amendments. When we run our application, we will see the form displays on screen. However, the focus is not on the very first field. The user would have to click on that before they can start typing. So we want to force the application to put the focus to the very first field so the user does not need to do that. We can again do that in the callback function, the event handler, in the initialization section. If we do F2 and go to our callback, and after we have set the fonts, we can put a command in to force focus to the first field. And we do that using the control set focus command. If we run the application now, we will see the first field has our cursor flashing in it quite happily. And if we tab around the application, we'll see that it moves quite happily through each of the fields in turn. The tab order is driven by the entries in the dialog new command. We will see each of the controls specified in turn. So how would we go about testing if something had gone wrong? Well, back to the callback function, the event handler. When the user presses the Submit button, that's the point where we want to validate the fields. So if we'll scroll down, we can put in an event for our button. And there is our event. We're testing for the button clicked event. If that triggers, then the Submit button has indeed been pressed. So we're going to create a new function called validate form. passing a single parameter, which is the handle of the form. Although this application has only a single dialog, you may well develop applications which have multiple dialogues. So here is the skeleton of our new validate form function. We've created 4 local variables. One for the title, one for the name, one for the age, and an additional one to contain output text. This is the text we're going to put to the label control on the dialog itself to feed back to the user what we've accepted from them. So first of all, we need to get the text from each of the 3 fields, the title, the name, and the age. We can do that quite easily by using control get text. As we have 3 fields to get, we're using the prefix command to save a little typing. We just have to name each of the fields we're interested in, title, the name, and the age, and we're taking that data out of those fields and putting it into the local variables we created a moment ago. So now we can do some testing. So first of all, we're testing the title variable to see if it's an empty length string. We're using the trim command just in case our user has put spaces in that field, which is always a possibility. You will find when you are validating dialogues that users have entered data into, you have to put a fair amount of code in to handle any kind of situation you're likely to encounter. So how are we going to highlight an error? In the form itself, we have the labels in blue. There are a number of ways of highlighting errors, but one way I've found quite useful is to change the colour of the label text from blue to red, and then set focus to the field which is actually in error. As you may well be doing this kind of validation on multiple forms, and certainly on multiple fields within a form, it's useful to have something generic that allows you to highlight these fields and set focus. We could do this in a function, but today I'm going to use a macro. In fact, in this case, I'm going to use 2 macros. If the title is blank, we're going to call this macro, giving it a number of parameters. If the title is anything other than blank, then it has been validated. But this may be after the user has already had an error, so our label could already be in red. So we want to clear any highlighting back to blue. So we're calling another macro to clear highlights. Macros are a very useful construct. They save you a bit of typing, they make your code more readable, and when PowerBasic compiles, it takes whatever's in the macro and puts it into the section of code. So if we look at the parameters we're passing first of all to the error highlight, we're passing the dialog handle, which is coming in on our parameters for this function. We're passing the feedback output where we want to put our data, the text we want to put in there, in this case no title entered. We want to highlight the title, so we're giving it the handle of the title, and we're giving it the text of the title. This is where we want to set focus. So let's go and create this first macro. So here is our macro. The difference between macros and functions is that in a function you would expect to have to declare each of these parameters as perhaps a string, a long, or whatever type of variable it actually is. In a macro, this is done at compile time. So whatever's coming in on this line, it will replace this line of code with these lines of code, with whatever the values that have been passed in. It's a very easy way to make your code more readable, and you are almost effectively creating a new command structure. So what we're doing in the error highlighting in this case is we are setting the text in the feedback output to whatever the text happens to be. In this case, no title entered. We are then setting the colour of the label to red foreground and leaving the background as it is. We're then forcing a redraw of that particular control to Windows, and we're then setting the focus to the text box. So now that we've created the error highlight, let's create the macro to clear the highlight. This takes exactly the same approach, passing a number of parameters which we're going to substitute into, in this case, these 3 lines of code. We're setting the colour of the label back to blue. We're then forcing a redraw of that control, and then we're setting the control in the feedback section to be blank. So if we try running the code now, and we click the submit button, it tells us no title has been entered in our form feedback. It set the focus back to the title box and has made the title bright red. If we type in the title and then submit, the title goes back to blue again. So we need to do the same approach for the other 2 fields. The name, which is also text, and the age, which is going to be a number. So if we go back to the validate form function, which we had started to build up. So having validated the title, we now need to do exactly the same for the name. And in this case, our error message is no name entered, using the same 2 macros which we have done previously. And our final validation is validating the age. In this case, I want to test to make sure that the age is not greater than 99 or less than 18. It's possibly unusual that you would have someone who is 99 years old working for your organisation, but of course you can set these values to any value that is appropriate for your own organisation. And our error message is going to be age is too young, old, or missing entirely. And as soon as this triggers, we exit the function. If it passes, we can then clear the highlight. And if we run the application now, it should, if we try and submit, complain about the title. So we'll put the title in. If we submit again, it should complain about the name. And if we submit once more, it should complain about the age. And if we put 150 in, it will say it's still wrong. And if we put an age which is more reasonable, it will be accepted. Now all we need to do is to populate this form feedback. So we can do that at the end of the validation. If it gets this far, then all 3 fields must have already been validated. So all we'll do here is we will populate our output variable with the title, trimmed with any spaces, the name added on, then a carriage return line feed, and then the age. And we will then use the control set text command to set that output into the feedback field. So if we run it once more, put some data in, hit the submit button, and it goes into our form feedback. And again, if anything's wrong in the ages, it should go back to this text. Ideally, when the age is determined as being not correct, I would like it to highlight the field to allow the user to key in another value. However, it does not do that at the moment, so let's go back to our callback function and put a little bit of more code in place. We don't have an event handler in for the age field at the moment, so we're going to put one in. And I'm going to put a select statement in here to allow us later to put more events in for this particular field. So we're looking for the set focus. This is where the field has been given the focus and we want to pre-select the field. And we can use another command called control send. This will send a value to a control. So what we're going to do here is we're going to send it to the text control, which is our age. And we're using this preset, which is the set select. And we're saying we're starting from the 0, which is the beginning of the field, and -1 means we want to select the entire field. This command can also be used to select a part of a text field. At the moment we're selecting from 0, which is the first field, to the very last field. But you can change these numbers to select anything in a text field. If we run our application now, and we do our checking again, and submit, and we put a large number in, and we submit once more, we'll see it is now pre-selected. So if I just type a new age, it will be taken quite happily. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we've added more fields to our dialog. We've also put a validation routine in place to allow us to validate each of the fields based on whatever criteria we wish. Should an error occur, we are highlighting to the user using the label by changing its colour and setting focus to that field. And for our age field, we are pre-selecting the number to allow the user just to overtype it. And should the validation pass for all three fields, we are pushing the information that the user has keyed in out to a form feedback section on the right-hand side of our dialog. We're also using the dialog default font command, which allows us to change the default font through the entire application in one line of code. If we exit from the application, go back to our PB main function, and change our size of the default font to say 12 point, and run the application once more, we'll see that everything has got bigger, with a single line of code. Hopefully you'll find these commands useful in your own applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more videos.